Quad 6.6. You know, sometimes it's good to have a plan, and other times it's good to not have a plan. And so in this case, I've been doing a lot of, well, let's drop the plan and just try stuff. And I've been doing that because of this build here. So this is the 1S build with these new RCN Power 1002 motors. These are high KV 22,000 and with a GemFan 2015 props. And I really like these props. They're well balanced. They've been I've gone through a lot of them and they've been consistent. How they press on, how tight they are, the balance in them has been very consistent. Hopefully they keep that up and they stay that way because I really like this prop a lot. But in terms of not having a plan, I thought this RCN Power 1002 motor, I didn't expect it to have the power it does. Yes, it's a high KV at 22,000, but it retains enough efficiency and has enough power to where this is a really fun quad to fly. And so that kind of makes me think, well, maybe I should just start trying some other things that I ordinarily wouldn't think work, and maybe they will. And sure enough, they have, and I'll kind of go through some of those things. The other thing that happened too is a little bit of a disappointment. So these Newbie drone motors came out. I was really excited because they came out with these 1102 motors, and yeah, they're a little bit chunky, and I expected that to be a little bit of a detriment. But the KV was good. It was 19,000 KV, and compared to what I'm used to in terms of the old GEP RC 1102 motors, which were 14,000, I thought that this would be a really kind of fun motor, and I thought that this KV, you know, with the bigger size motor with the GemFan 2015 prop, maybe giving up a little KV compared to the 1002s, you'd gain it back in terms of having the bigger motor, spinning the prop a little better. But unfortunately, it doesn't do that on that prop. It just doesn't have quite the KV, and it doesn't really offer any more efficiency, and so there's not really a great use for that in my mind on this 2015 prop. For the 2015 prop on 1S, I would definitely go with these RCN Power 1002s. The other thing that was a little bit of a disappointment was trying the old kind of old faithful props. So these were the 65mm press-ons. They're the GemFan clones. These particular ones I think were LDRC. They've been sold under different names like Who Cares and things like that. And this combination, there's a lot I love about it. Once you put the slightly bigger prop on the 1102 motor, it comes alive. You finally get the power, the efficiency is still good enough, and the quad comes alive. However, even with a 1S motor, now that I've been flying some good props, like especially like those 3-inch Avan props, now that I kind of get used to it in these 2015 props, the deficiencies of this old Who Cares, this old GemFan clone, really comes out. These props are just so thin and floppy. When you crash them, they're very much one and done, and then they're so floppy that even on an 1102 motor 1S, you kind of blow through them a lot. They introduce a lot of little bobbles and quirks and things like that, and so that was kind of a disappointment. So unfortunately right now, the 1S version of this motor is kind of a motor in need of a prop. And I hope it's made because I think if you got a good prop on this motor, I think this would be a really nice build, but right now, I just don't think that there's a prop out there that really will do this motor justice. There's some other things like the GemFan 65S, RS, whatever those are. Those are going to be a little closer, but the balance is poor. The HQ 65mm press-ons, those are kind of inefficient and kind of sort of lacking. The T65s are too heavy a prop, for 1S. And there's really not the equivalent of this GemFan 2015 or the Emax Avan 3-inch prop, not Avan, sorry, a VIA prop in the 3-inch. There just isn't an equivalent in the 2.5-inch side and the 65mm side, and so until that happens, these 1S version, this 19,000 kV version, it needs a prop. We just don't have it right now, which is a disappointment. However, things we do have. Fortunately, Newbie Drone also made this motor in a 10,000 kV variant, which works pretty well once you throw a 2S at it. So with this quad, either flying a battery like this, these GNB 300 milliamp hour battery 2S, this is a very nice little combination right here. Or using the Newbie Drone 300 milliamp battery, those nitro nectars. That's also a very good battery, and so that's a very nice combination. The quad has plenty of power. It is with this, it doesn't track quite as well as the 2.5 millimeter quads, but the volume is good. There's enough power, and the speed isn't so. The speed isn't intimidating, and it's kind of an interesting quad. So one of the things it does that's interesting is it feels like it throws better than it should. So it's not super fast, but when you do throw it, it really travels a long way, and I think that's just a combination of fairly, heavy-ish build compared to the size of the props. But it throws really well. So this particular build built up, let's see what it built up at. So 37 grams plus the battery. So all up weight 55 grams. So 37 grams for the dry weight, and that can definitely come down. There's some extra weight on here that doesn't need to be on here in terms of the Amlec camera. This flywheel board's kind of on the heavy side. So the weight can come down a little bit by a gram or two, but not a ton. And then with the 300 milliamp battery, you're looking up at a 55 gram all up weight. So it's a little bit smaller footprint and a little bit lighter than my equivalent, I shouldn't say really equivalent, it's kind of a different beast, but the 2.5 inch quad, which is going to be more along the lines of a 60 gram all up weight. But this quad flies well, and some of the nice things about it is these with the good prop, you can just push these on. You don't have to do any balancing on the props or anything like that. In terms of the frame for this is a war pig or piglet. I'm calling them piglets, so when I do this little 3-hole mount, I call that a piglet. And I did it in 110 millimeters, motor mount to motor mount, and I think that is the size. Now easily for this prop you could go down to like a 105 and still have plenty of clearance, but I find the slightly larger footprint really helps in terms of the tracking. This is about as small as I really want to go on the 2S in terms of getting kind of the tracking that I want out of it. What's kind of fun about it is even though it throws well, it also flies proximity well. I have very good comfort going into kind of the slalom around the bushes that I do, and so that's kind of a nice surprise. So this is a really nice kind of daily driver quad. These motors, they seem pretty chunky. They seem like they're going to hold up well. The props, you don't have to do anything with them. There's good options with the batteries, with the GNBs, and also the Nubidrone nitro nectars. And so a nice little 2S quad, nice little backyard flyer. One of the things I did do with the frame on the 1S frame, the previous one I had done it in a 1.5 millimeter, and that's one of the things I changed. I went up to 2 millimeters, and these screws are still just barely long enough to go up to a 2 millimeter carbon fiber frame. And then I also made some differences in terms of making the arms a little bit wider, and that improved my stiffness a lot. This frame here, I'm calling this a Skyrider, and this one is actually 98 millimeters. And by going to the 2 millimeter carbon fiber and kind of making the arms just a tiny bit wider, they're not horribly wide, but you can see that they are wider than the wires. One of the things I used to do on this is kind of keep the arms a minimal width so that you're not wasting a whole bunch of like thrust into the arm. You're not blocking the thrust with the arm. But when we're kind of limited to a 2 millimeter thickness by the motor screw, and maybe that's a bad choice. Maybe you should just say, okay, well, let's just do 2.5 millimeters and go buy some motor screws that are longer so you can use it. But I'm trying to have this be something that's like easy just to kind of, pull parts off the shelf and build it up and not have to go chasing screws and things like that. And so 2 millimeters is thickest that I can do with these screws. But I feel like I've gotten good enough stiffness out of this, and when I've checked the black box, sure enough, the black box looks good, and that's probably a combination of having pretty smooth motors and nicely balanced props, where you don't need a crazy stiff motor because there's not a lot of noise getting generated. Now I need to probably like bend a couple motors and fly out with that to see how it handles the noise once you start throwing a lot of noise, a lot of vibration at it. But so far it seems to be working pretty well. So other things that I've tried. And this is the other thing I've been trying. So these are 1202.5 motors. So these are the flywheel 11,500 kV, and so these are the motors back when the 3-inch thing started going with the 1S. And so these are a high kV motor, and initially kind of intended to be flown with the 3-inch props, basically kind of stealing Rugy's little formula, the FP's V-cycle formula of a 1202.5, and that's since been replaced by bigger motors, 1203s and 13mm motors. But I had a bunch of these 1202.5 sitting around in a high kV, and I'm like thinking, well, maybe with these GemFan 2015 props we can make some kind of good combination, and sure enough we can. So I started flying this quad with 2S with the 2015 battery, 2015 props, and the 300 milliamp battery, and it's kind of a fun little quad. The main downside of it is you are pulling a fair amount of current, and so with the 300 milliamp battery it's basically like a 3-minute flight and you're done. What's interesting about it with the small GemFan 2015 props is that you can really throw this quad really well. Now, it does definitely start to compromise in terms of once you're trying to fly the proximity, it flies with a lot of momentum. So if you like that, if you like kind of throwing your quad and having a lot of momentum, go ahead with the 300 milliamp battery. Go ahead and put the GemFan 2015 props on there, and it's a nice little quad. Now for me personally, I kind of like flying that proximity, those tight little slalom moves around the bushes, and so this quad, when you do that kind of stuff, instead of like carving around the turns, it's more like you kind of go into the turn and then like rotate the quad and kind of slide back in and then drive through it. And so it's more of like kind of like a rally motion rather than a carving motion when you're flying. That's kind of a little hard to show on the table, but it's a pretty dramatic feel. And so for me, that starts to get a little too challenging for me to fly in terms of proximity. Now, if I'm in a bigger open area and I just want to throw it all over the place, so be it. I did try flying it with a bigger battery, you know, like these 530 milliamp, which is the same size as the Pink Label 450. So these are the G&B 530 yellows, and basically the same size as the older Pink 450s. And I tried flying that with the 2015s, and that to me just kind of gets a little ridiculous, a little too much. But on the bigger battery, the motors do put out more power. And the other thing I tried, I didn't think this would work at all. I thought I'd smoke something or do something terrible, but I went ahead and threw the HQ T65 props on here. And with the 530 yellow label or 450 pink label, that is a freaking awesome quad. It is just, it's a little monster. It really is. It's a little bit heavier than my other one. Let me see what this built up at. So that's 43 grams for the quad dry weight. Add the battery, and we're at 70 grams all up weight. So 70 grams all up weight versus my Old Faithful, which is on the 1103s, flying with a 300. So that quad builds up at 40 grams dry weight, and with the battery, 58 grams. So versus the 1102 build, or 1103 build with the 300 milliamp, going to the 1202.5 with the 530, you're looking at a 10 gram difference. But this quad has all the power in the world to handle that extra 10 grams and then some. I mean, the punch out's really fun on it. And it tracks well enough, and it does the proximity well enough. It definitely flies with more momentum, but it controls it well enough to where I can still fly that proximity well, but I get the extra throw out of it, which is kind of really fun. It's definitely a little louder on the punch outs. It screams a little bit more because it's just spinning the motors, spinning those props faster. So a little bit less neighbor friendly, but that is a seriously fun quad to fly. And flight time is good enough. It's with the bigger, with the bigger size battery. This is a nice, easy 4 minutes to get out of it on mixed flying. You can do it with the 300, but then you're really looking at like a 3 minute and done, And especially if the batteries are a little older, you're looking at 2 to 3 minutes. But that is a nice little quad. Now, going back, having tried a whole bunch of stuff, where does Old Faithful kind of fit? So this is my old Warpig 115 millimeter frame. Oh, that's one little detail. So on this this particular build, I'm flying this on a slightly smaller frame. This is a Warpig 110 and it's in 2.5 millimeter. And just making that little difference with shortening the frame down, even though we went to a thinner, seems to have every bit of the torsional stiffness of the 3 millimeter 115, and the black box logs look great on it. So this quad here, especially with the GemFan 2015 prop, super clean. But even on these noisier T65s, it still handles that perfectly well. I do think I need to adjust the PIDs down a little bit. It's running a little high strung, and that's not surprising with the extra kV. You're talking about 11,500 kV versus on the 1103. This is like 7,800 kV, so that's a pretty big difference. But anyways, quad that I just wouldn't have done, but it's trying stuff, and I really like it a lot. What else to talk about? A couple other things. One of the things I've been doing is, because I've had such different performance out of some of the batteries, so with the 300 milliamp batteries, what's kind of interesting is I've been measuring the internal resistance, and I wouldn't take this number as a absolute value. I take it as a relative value, because it matters what kind of plug, what kind of condition your plugs are in, how long the wires are, and all the rest of it. But what I did is I took all my 300 milliamp batteries, my 2S ones, and I checked internal resistance on them, and I got a pretty broad range of numbers. My BAS battery was actually a Nubidrone nitronectar. Let's see, it's this guy right here. So this Nubidrone nitronectar, it was 24 ohms and 34 ohms. My next best was this G&D, which was 3431. And basically, when I fly these cells, they basically perform about the same. I was really impressed with this Nubidrone nitronectar, but compared to a good G&B, I don't think it's any better than a good G&B. From the 1S cells I've had of these, they've been super consistent, so I think Nubidrone, you're paying basically twice, if not more than that as much, but you get such consistency that maybe, I don't know, do you have to buy twice as many G&Bs to get the same good cells? Maybe, I'm not sure. But I went ahead and did that on all these cells, and what I've been finding is basically, and not surprising, is if you have a particularly bad cell, that's really your limiter. So for example, on this one, and this is some of the inconsistency I've talked about. So these are the G&B 380 yellow labels. This, one of the cells in here was 75, the other one's 51, and basically once these are 51 or higher, these cells are kind of garbage, and in particular this one at 75. This cell is it's like a 2-minute flight versus 4-minute flight. So same cells, and this 380 isn't any older than this pink label, but you get 4 minutes versus 2 and change, 2 minutes 20 seconds, something like that. And so that quality of the cell makes a big difference. And so I've been seeing kind of range. I've got one of these pink labels that's this is my best one, it's 3431. I've got one that's 4141. And it starts to fall off. Once I see numbers like 5150, this starts to fall off. And once I'm seeing anything like 60s or 75 on these, then it's just terrible. Now that's definitely these numbers will change. Internal resistance will change based on whether the battery's fully charged or storage charged. It'll depend on your connectors, wire length, a bunch of things, how warm the cell is. So if you're going to make this kind of comparison, if you're going to go through your cells, I would do it all at the same time. Basically charge them up all to the same storage or max charge, whatever you want to do. Do it the same, do it all at the same time, same temperature, and kind of sort your cells that way. And what I'd actually recommend doing is, when you're flying your good batteries, especially if you're parallel charging multiple batteries, don't fly them at the same time as your junk cells. Use your junk cells for something else, like practice or fixed wings or something like that, and save your good cells for when you're flying, your quad or higher demand quad. Because when you put these, it's hard to discharge these when you're flying, because you get so much more sag with the poorer quality cell, that it's hard to get the same resting voltage. And so when you're plugging things in, there's that quick surge of power, and that's going to beat up on one or both of your cells. And then when you're charging, it's going to take just that much longer to balance these out, because you have such difference that when you're charging them up, you're going to notice that once the charger goes into that balancing phase, it's going to sit there a lot longer if you have different quality cells on there at the same time. That's just what I've been noticing. I've been seeing similar things on the 1S cells, interestingly enough. So, for example, I've got a couple of these tattoo R lines, and so when I went through these, I found that both of these were 9 ohms on both of the tattoos, and they both fly very similarly. I get very similar flight times out of them, and I also get very similar flight times compared to this particular G&B cell. It's a 525, and this one also measured at 9 ohms, and I get very similar flight time with this. Well, this 450 I get a little bit less, but the sag is not as bad as some of the other ones. But this 450 measured at 11. This one's still pretty good. And then, lo and behold, you measure these out at 23. So this is a pink label 520 and a yellow label 530. And these are measured out at 23. And these are junk compared to the R line. So if you have that feature on your charger to check internal resistance, it's probably a good thing to do. Just go through them all, label them up, and then pair them up, you know, in terms of, you know, when you have a quad that needs it, fly your good cells, and when you have something else that doesn't need that low internal resistance, then go ahead and fly your junk cells.